This day in sports history. Part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sports. Learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. It's July 13th, and on this day in 1972, it was the biggest trade that you've never heard about. Welcome, loyal listener of this dish, to another wild, crazy story about a trade that may actually top the ones that I've mentioned before here on this podcast. Maybe not in salaciousness like the two New York Yankee pitchers that traded their wives, kids, and dogs. Maybe not in craziness like Al Michaels being traded for Walt Disney's original cartoon character, and not as humorous as a player being traded for cases of beer or himself. But this trade was huge, and nothing like it had happened prior to this, and it hasn't happened since. Baltimore Colts owner Carroll Rosenblum had made his money making clothing, and he was so successful he was able to sell that business and retire at age 32 to pursue other interests. He invested in the production of Broadway shows. He bought a farm. His old college football teammate Bert Bell also happened to be the commissioner of the NFL at the time, and Bert encouraged him to invest $13,000 in the Baltimore Colts in 1953, which he did. Rosenblum built the Colts into a winner. Within the decade, he hired Weeb Ewbank to coach the team. He brought Johnny Unitas in to play quarterback, and he engineered a trade to add Don Shula to the roster, and eventually Shula became the coach of the Colts. Success followed with a championship in 1958, Super Bowl appearances, and a win in Super Bowl V in 1971. He was also successful in helping build the league into what it became, a proponent of revenue sharing and television contracts. He helped guide the NFL and AFL to a successful merger. Rosenblum was born in Baltimore, but by 1969 he was spending most of his time in either New York or Florida. He had issues with other owners in the league, such as Joe Robbie, who had lured Shula away to coach the Miami Dolphins with an outrageous contract. He was disenchanted with the city and its politicians that didn't see the value in building his Colts a new stadium to replace the one that was falling apart. By late summer 1971, Rosenblum was looking for a way out. Sure, his Colts were defending Super Bowl champs, but the 3 preseason games the Colts hosted prior to the 71-72 season, attendance was abysmal. Indications were he was frustrated by the 16,000 people coming through the turnstiles for those games. He wondered if relocating the team would be a good idea. He looked at Tampa as a possibility a little less than a decade before the Buccaneers would make it their home. Maybe a short move somewhere else in Maryland. But there was resistance from the commissioner's office, now manned by Pete Rozelle. When Dan Reeves, the owner of the Los Angeles Rams, died in 1971, his family put the team up for sale, and Rosenblum wanted to buy the team. He was ready to head to the sun and sand of the West Coast. He was already considering buying the Lakers. His first thought is that he would buy the Rams and let his son run the Colts. Well, Rozelle vetoed that idea and instead suggested he sell the Colts and buy the Rams. But that would have triggered a nearly $4.5 million capital gains tax payment, which Rosenblum wanted to avoid. But that did get the gears moving on another idea: a trade. Willard Keeland and Clem Ryan were 2 wealthy businessmen who agreed to buy the Rams for $19 million. But when it came down to brass tacks, they were about $5 million short. So they brought a third to the table for a 3-way partnership. That man was Robert Irsay. When it finally came time to make the transaction happen, Keeland and Ryan dropped out, leaving Irsay with the full $19 million bill. No matter, Irsay was a gambling man and he liked his odds, so he bought the Rams. He was hungry, famished for a taste of the NFL. He didn't care what was on the buffet, he just wanted a seat at the table. But while Robert liked to spend some time in Vegas on occasion and play baccarat, he wasn't really an LA guy. He was from Chicago, and so he was open to a trade. When the idea of trading the Colts franchise for the Rams franchise reached Commissioner Rozelle's desk, there was immediate opposition. But nobody could really think of a legal reason why it couldn't happen. So, On this day in 1972, Carroll Rosenbloom traded his Baltimore Colts to Robert Irsay for the Los Angeles Rams in a straight-up deal. On this day in 1930, the first ever World Cup matches were played. Uruguay was selected as the host country since they had won the gold medal in the two previous Olympic Games in 1924 and 1928. 13 teams took part in this inaugural event. Only 4 of those teams were from Europe, though, due in large part to the difficulty and time it took to travel to South America in those days. But players were also concerned that their jobs would not be there when they got back. England had been dominant on the international stage, but they couldn't find players willing to take the time off to travel. Romania's king solved that problem for his team by giving his players a 3-month vacation and the assurance that their jobs would be waiting when they returned. On this day, France beat Mexico 4-1. Lucien Laurent is the answer to the trivia question, who scored the first ever World Cup goal, as he put France on top early. In the second match of the day, it was the United States versus Belgium, and weather played a big role in this one. Heavy rain and snow made the field tough to play on. The Belgians were not happy with the field conditions, and they spent a lot of time arguing with the referees, especially about the second goal that the U.S. scored, which they thought should have been disallowed due to offside. Well, the U.S. blanked Belgium 3-0. American goalkeeper Jimmy Douglas is on record as the first to record a clean sheet in a World Cup match. And I'll have a lot more about the 1930 World Cup as the summer progresses. On this day in 1993, it was a sad day for NASCAR and the state of Alabama, as race car driver Davey Allison died after a helicopter crash the day before. Allison was piloting the helicopter with Red Farmer in the passenger seat, going to Talladega for a test at the track. Allison didn't have a lot of flight time in this particular helicopter, less than 10 hours, and he was attempting a downwind landing in a tight space, surrounded by power lines and tall fences. As they got close to the ground, the aircraft oscillated side to side. It rose 25 feet in the air, and then it began to spin. The NTSB cited pilot error as the reason for the crash. Farmer was seriously injured, but he survived and is still living and working on race cars in Pelham, Alabama. Allison, the son of longtime NASCAR driver Bobby Allison, suffered a severe head injury and died on this day in 1993. He was 32 years old. On this day in 1934, Babe Ruth hit home run number 700. At this point, the 39-year-old Ruth was on the tail end of his career and held just about every batting record in the books. He had been the all-time home run leader for a while now, passing Roger Connor 13 years earlier in July 1921 when he hit career home run number 139. Number 700 on this day came against the Detroit Tigers' Tommy Bridges. It was a 2-run shot to right that gave the Yankees the lead, and they went on to win 4-2. The following day, the New York Times proclaimed that Ruth's record of 700 home runs would stand for all time. Surely a lack of long-term foresight, right? But to be fair, the closest to him at the time was his teammate Lou Gehrig with 323. Jimmy Fox had 248 at this point, and he would wind up being the closest to Ruth when it was all said and done on the all-time home runs list with 534. And on this day in 1979, one of my all-time favorite movies was released in theaters, Breaking Away, starring Dennis Christopher, Dennis Quaid, Jackie Earle Haley, and Daniel Stern, is a coming-of-age story wrapped around a love of cycling, and especially the cycling Italians. It also introduced people outside of Indiana to the wonder of the Little 500 bike race on Indiana's campus. The Little 500 is an actual race that is still raced each and every year, and it features teams of 4 racing on a quarter-mile cinder track. Men race 200 laps, and the women race 100 laps. Time now for today's Non-Sports Did You Know? On March 3, 1876, sometime after 11 a.m. in Bath County, Kentucky, meat fell from the sky for about 2 minutes. The origins of the meat shower are still unknown, though there are a few theories that are considered plausible. That's all for today. Nothing like talk of a meat shower to get your day off to a great start, huh? Well, enjoy your day nonetheless, and I will see you back here tomorrow morning. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.